This is why you shouldn't go for walks in Sweden. In 2008, a Swedish woman went out for an evening stroll with her dog, but never came back. Her husband went looking for her and found her dead next to a lake. The police immediately blamed her husband and sent him to jail. After a few months, the woman's forensic analysis report came back, and it was clear the husband was innocent because there was all this hair and saliva on the woman's body that was not his. It turns out there is a very strange phenomenon that occurs in Sweden in the fall when all of the apples have fallen off of their trees. Those apples ferment, and then hordes of moose eat those apples, becoming drunk and oftentimes very belligerent, like this drunk moose who got stuck in a tree. The hair and saliva of the killer belonged to a drunk Swedish moose.
Let's talk about a girl who spent 44 days in hell. Her name is Janku Faruda, and she was 16 years old at the time. She was very popular at school because of her beauty, but not only that, she was extremely book smart. She was a straight A student. One day while at school, a boy who was affiliated with a very dangerous gang asked her out, and she rejected him. He took the rejection to heart, and he set up a plan to kidnap her with his friends. The kidnapping was successful, and they took Janku back to one of the houses that the boy's parents owned. 2 days after her missing, her family put in a missing persons report. Everybody in Japan was looking for her. So the boys made her call her parents and tell them that she was safe and that she was just with a friend. The parents that owned the house knew that Janku was there, but they were paid hush money to stay silent, as well as they were scared to say anything to the police because they knew what the boys were capable of. Things are about to get graphic, so this is your chance to scroll away. They kept her naked for most of the time to humiliate her. They took turns raping her. She was raped by more than 100 men, more than 500 times. And one time there was a day where she was raped 12 times back to back. Most of the time after they were finished doing that to her, they would often pee on her. They would smash her face into cement and beat her with golf clubs. They would make her touch herself in front of the men to turn them on before they would rape her. They would stick all sorts of crazy objects inside of her, from scissors, needles, iron rods, and one time there was a hot light bulb that they forced inside of her and twisted it around until it popped inside of her. Sometimes they would grab fireworks and shove them up her butt and light them. Other times they would have a big weight and drop them on her stomach while her hands are tied above her head. They would tie her from the ceiling and punch her like she was a punching bag. During this time it was winter and below freezing, so they would make her sleep outside on the balcony. They would burn her eyelids with hot wax, and they even crushed her hands so much that she couldn't hold anything. It would take her about an hour to crawl downstairs just to use the restroom. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished because of the fact that she couldn't eat, and whenever she did, she would throw it up because her organs were so damaged. Her suffering came to an end when she won a game against the boys, and they put lighter fluid all over her face, arms, torso, and legs, and they lit her on fire. She fell into shock, and they thought that she was just pretending to die, but she was actually dead. So they filled this huge drum with cement and shoved her body down there. Then they disposed of her somewhere in Tokyo. While being questioned about a different case, one of the boys thought that they were talking about Janku, and he quickly admitted to everything and told the police where her body was and all the horrible things that they did to her. The time they got was very short. I believe the highest one of the boys received was 20, and the rest of the boys were sentenced below that. So they're now all in their mid-30s.
This is the weirdest, most toxic marriage I've ever seen in the history of life. So this is Linda, and one day she was just hanging out at the Bronx when all of a sudden a car pulls up, stops in the middle of the street, and out comes good old Bert. He was a successful attorney, and he was like, listen, you're the most beautiful person that has ever existed. Please date me. So she does, and they start dating, and it was really cute in the beginning. And then she finds out that he has a wife and a kid at home. Now, you would think that Linda would be the one that would be mad, but Bert got mad and he said, listen, if I can't have you, ain't nobody gonna have you. And when I'm done with you, nobody's gonna want you. End quote. She reported it to the police and they didn't really do anything, so she ends up moving on and gets engaged to a guy by the name of Larry. So when Bert finds out about the engagement, he decides to hire someone to throw acid in her face. This will leave her eventually permanently blind and scarred. So Bert gets sent to prison for 14 years, and when he's released, this is the kicker. He proposes to Linda. And she deadass accepts. And they get married. She said that the best revenge for blinding her was now that he has to put up with her every day.
After hours of drinking and joking around, they were standing in the backyard on the patio when they noticed a small slug crawling across the ground. And at some point, one of the boys yelled out, "Hey, someone should eat that." Sam took it as a challenge and said, "You know what? I'll eat the slug." And so he picked that slug up, threw it in his mouth, and he ate it. The next morning when Sam got up, he noticed a dull ache in his legs. So they went to the doctor, and Sam brought up the fact that he had eaten this slug, and it looks like Sam had something called rat lungworm disease. This is an infection most commonly found in rats that's caused by a parasitic worm that can be passed down to snails and slugs if they eat the rat feces that contains the parasite's larva. Based on Sam's symptoms, the doctor informed him that most likely the slug he consumed at that party was a carrier of the parasite. Just a few days after his diagnosis, Sam did develop the rare form of meningitis, and he slipped into a coma for 420 days. When he finally woke up, he was paralyzed, he wasn't able to speak, and he couldn't eat without a feeding tube. He required care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Mary Kay Letourneau is probably the most well-known female sex offender. In Washington, 1996, Mary was a married woman of almost 15 years and had 4 children between the ages of 2 years old and 11 years old. She was an elementary school teacher that taught the 6th grade when she started a sexual relationship during the summer school with her 12-year-old student, Villy Falau. Villy was only 1 year older than her 11-year-old son. And Mary said that Villy was the one who seduced her and they both fell in love. One day they were in her car in the parking lot and an officer came up to them and she said Villy was 18 years old. The officer didn't believe her, so they were both taken down to the police station where his real age was revealed and she was arrested. When Mary's husband Steve found out, he quickly divorced her, got custody of all 4 of the kids they had together, and he moved to Alaska. While awaiting trial, Mary found out that she was pregnant with Villy's baby, who was only 13 years old now. She took a plea deal and pleaded guilty, and she was only given 6 months in prison. The baby was put into Villy's custody, and in the plea agreement, she was supposed to have no contact with Villy or her now 5 children. But in 1998, 2 weeks after being released, her and Villy were found in a parking lot. An officer came up to the car. He said the windows looked steamy. She tried to give the officer a fake name, but everybody knew who she was due to her story getting national coverage. She was immediately arrested and sentenced to 7 years in prison, where she would give birth to her 2nd child by Villy, who is now 15 years old. Mary was released from prison in 2004, and in 2005, when Villy was 21 years old, they got married. They have done multiple interviews together, they wrote 2 books together, and Mary said repeatedly that she felt like what she did to Villy wasn't wrong, because they were both in love. In 2018, they had divorced, and Villy said that his relationship with Mary was wrong and he is ready to start a healthy relationship. Their 2 daughters are now in their early 20s, and Villy is 38 years old. And last year, at 58 years old, Mary had died of cancer and left her whole estate to Villy.
Hi, I'm Cam, and this group of friends thought they were opening a suitcase full of cash, but it ended up being anyone's worst nightmare. On August 19th, 2020, a group of teens went randonauting on a West Seattle beach. They stumbled upon a black suitcase. Immediately, they smelled the most putrid odor. They opened the suitcase and saw that something was wrapped in a black garbage bag. They decided to call the police. What the teens found turned out to be the bodies of 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and 27-year-old Austin Wenner. Autopsies revealed that Jessica had been shot multiple times, and Austin had suffered a single gunshot to the torso. They had both been beaten and dismembered to fit in the suitcases. The couple, who had been together for 8 years, had been killed 2 months prior to their discovery. The killer, 62-year-old Michael Lee Doodley, their landlord. On June 9th, Michael let another woman move into Jessica and Austin's apartment. When she entered, there was heaps of clothing everywhere. Under a pile, she saw the figure of a person and a bloody hand sticking out. She made a joke out of fear and Michael laughed. Michael told authorities that the victims hadn't paid $1,500 for rent. He also has a restraining order from his own daughter because he sexually assaulted her.
How is it possible to vanish into thin air while physically talking to another person? This is the strange disappearance of Brandon Swanson. On May 13th, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon attended a couple of parties to celebrate completing his very first year of college at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, Minnesota. The first party Brandon attended was in Lind, which was about 7 miles from Marshall, Minnesota, where he lived. There, he chatted with friends, had a beer or 2, and decided to leave around 10:30 to 11:30 p.m. Friends at this party claimed that Brandon did not seem intoxicated and was very clear-headed. Brandon then went to a party in Canby, which is about 30 miles away from Lind and Marshall. There, he had 1 shot of whiskey and at around midnight decided it was time to go home. And again, his friends stated that at this party, he still did not seem intoxicated. Brandon normally took Highway 68 home. It was a straight shot and he had driven it many times. But on this night, for whatever reason, he decided to take a back road home. At around 1:15 a.m., Brandon drove his Chevrolet Lumina into a ditch and was unable to get out. 30 minutes later, he called his parents asking them to come and pick him up, giving them very specific directions of where exactly he was at and that he was near Lind. His parents, Annette and Brian, stayed on the phone with him until they got to where Brandon said he was, but they couldn't see him. They both agreed to flash their headlights as a signal, but they still couldn't see each other. This was odd as this particular area is super flat and would be easy to see each other. At 2:17 a.m., Brandon, being frustrated that they couldn't find him, tells his parents that he sees Lynn's city lights and is just going to walk there to grab a friend. He tells them that he's going to cut through fields to make the walk shorter and is actively describing what he sees, a couple of fences, that he could hear running water, and that he's walking on a gravel road. At around 3:10 a.m., 47 minutes into the phone call with his parents, Brandon yells, "Oh shit," and the call ends. His parents repeatedly try calling him back, but he never answers. They search along Highway 68, but find no trace of him. At 6:30 the next morning, they report Brandon missing to the police, in which they said it wasn't unusual for a young man Brandon's age to stay out all night, and that he, quote, had a right to be missing, end quote. Eventually, police do start looking for him and pull up his cell phone records. Through pings, they found Brandon was actually near Porter when he called his parents, not Lind like he said, which is about 25 miles away. Upon further investigation, police found Brandon's car about 1.5 miles from Taunton. It was on a gravel road, and because of that, there were no footprints indicating which way Brandon went. Extensive ground and air searches were conducted, but absolutely no trace of Brandon was found. Bloodhounds were brought in and tracked his scent down Country Road 16 onto an abandoned driveway of a farm next to Yellow Medicine River and at one point in the river but getting back out and then leading to a drainage point. There his scent ends. The river was searched for 30 days but turned up absolutely nothing. What Brandon saw that night that made him yell "oh shit" remains a mystery. It has now been 13 years and Brandon's disappearance remains unsolved. To this day, Brandon's parents leave their light on in hopes one day he will come back home.